Hello indie game fans, roguelites continue to dominate the indie game scene with the appeal of endless replayability being great for your wallet, so the best releases of the year begins with Karate Survivor, an alternative take on the Vampire Survivors style title, which you will see a number of in this video, since instead of your character firing off projectiles like a madman, you are limited to punches, kicks, as well as the use of environmental objects, while still having to face off against hordes of enemies. This is a clear tribute to action movie star Jackie Chan, especially his movies from the 1980s, having some fun upgrades, and in Survivors-like fashion, it is very satisfying to take out so many enemies. A neat looking hand-drawn roguelite platformer which released out of early access earlier in the year is Spiritfall, having an upgrade system inspired by Hades and combat inspired by Smash Brothers, with the variety of elemental attacks and animal spirits that you can call upon being pretty fun. And post 1.0 release, the developers have been hard at work, adding more free content to the game, and is up to version 1.5 and is pretty underrated all things considered. This video is brought to you by Doors of Insanity Reopened, a roguelite deck building RPG that is somewhere in between a remaster and a sequel to Doors of Insanity from 2022, including complete overhauls of mechanics and systems that makes it a new thing. Your goal is to escape purgatory by fighting your way through what seems like an endless maze of doors, where you never quite know what is lurking behind each door. The game doesn't play it straight, and leans more on the humorous end of things, since you do get access to weapons like the Man Mincer, which transforms enemies killed into consumable meatloaves, and in deck building fashion, you can craft your deck to find unique, interesting, and overpowered synergies between the cards, including turning enemies into gold or to summon allies of your own. New in this version is an equipment system which affects cards, a new dice system which adds game-changing randomness ranging from duplicating your entire hand to making all cards cost health to play for the next turn, as well as new enemies and improvements in UI and quality of life elements. I've always been a fan of developer One Shark due to their art, going back to Chicken Assassin Reloaded from 2016, which I covered on this channel way back when, so I was very happy to work with them and their publisher, and they have done the consumer-friendly thing of giving you this new version for free if you own the original, so if interested, try their free demo on Steam and wishlist the game via the link in the description below. The most recent release chronologically is Caves of Qud, which just came out of early access and is a minimalist looking traditional turn-based grid-based roguelike where anything is possible. And like Dwarf Fortress before it, which officially launched on Steam in 2022, this game has an extensive development history and a bunch of die-hard fans. If you're not familiar, this goes back to the source in games like Rogue and NetHack, but has more modernized elements like having actual graphics instead of ASCII symbols, and also, in contrast, this has a science fantasy setting instead of just fantasy. So in addition to slimes and unicorns, you have robots and cybernetic implants as well. The appeal of this kind of game to me is the emergent stories that come out of it, which you can get a sampling of from Steam reviews, where truly anything can happen in this game, and the game actually accounts for all the possibilities. It took them 15 years to get to this point, and the number of hours of development shows, since it is chock full of content, with 70 mutations, dozens of cybernetic implants, 24 castes and kits that form the social order in the game, 4 game modes, 70 factions, including apes, crabs, and trees, and so much more. While visually simple relative to modern games, the sheer amount of weird and emergent stuff in this game is of note, so while it might not attract a mainstream audience, if you're into cool and unique titles, this will definitely be of interest. Similarly, another open-ended, turn-based, grid-based roguelike title is Elin, one that, if you can believe it, gives you even more options since it is framed as a sandbox RPG, introducing crafting, survival game elements as well as base building and management. You are creating a character from a variety of fantasy races, each with its own strengths and weaknesses that you need to figure out, but the game throws you into the thick of things and you just have to experiment with it, learning painful lessons by dying over and over again. Having been described as being actively unkind to the player, but if you can endure repeatedly getting punched in the face, there is a very deep game here with a near infinite amount of stuff to do. For example, you can explore the world and fight monsters like in any RPG, but can return to town and buy a house, become a farmer and sell your crops for massive profits, using that to purchase more buildings and eventually own the entire town. Or, your companion could secretly be a serial killer that leaves bodies all over town, which the local butcher gladly collects and turns into meat for sale, increasing your reputation and friendliness with the character at a dark cost. Or you could be a musician, a magician, and so much more. It is still early days for this game, having just released in early access in November, but the reception is already tremendously positive and only looks to get better. A fun action roguelike title is Magicraft, a spell crafting title in which you are taking basic spells and combining them by slotting them into staffs and wands, attempting to create the most overpowered build to take out your enemies, which is the appeal here. Roguelites can often be fun if you feel like you have broken the game, only to get swiftly put in your place by the next area boss, and this game has that in spades, since some of the combinations to be discovered can fill the entire screen in projectiles. This plays like Binding of Isaac with the spell crafting of Noita, and while the English translation is a little rough, it's good enough for you to get the gist of the game. We have a number of dice-based entries this year as well, which is in addition to card-based titles being similar but not quite the same thing, with a great example being Slice and Dice. This is a tactical, combat-focused roguelite where you put 5 heroes in a party and attempt to fight your way through 20 levels of monsters in the dungeon and to take on the final boss. Rolled dice can be slotted into characters, which then activates abilities, where you can strategically re-roll if required. There are a ridiculous 128 hero classes to choose from, along with 73 monster types, 473 items, an infinite number of cursors, mod support, and too many game modes, and is definitely of interest to strategy roguelite fans. I asked subscribers to my newsletter to tell me about their personal game of the year a few weeks back, and if you're interested to keep on top of all things indie games, sign up via the link in the description below, and received a few responses indicating Chrono Ark, a roguelite RPG that has a UI and interface which looks similar to Japanese dungeon-crawling turn-based RPGs like Etrian Odyssey, and similarly is an anime-inspired one of these but with a run-based structure. You are assembling a team of unique investigators to restore the twisted world, using complementary abilities to support each other as you take on tough enemies and bosses. This has a party-style card-based combat where all the skills and perks appear as cards, and with 20 unique characters, each with their own special abilities, there's plenty to experiment and theory craft around as you attempt to beat the game. It is very deep in terms of systems, in the way that you get new cards or select which new party member to join you, having to consider their place in the party and how they will work with the other characters, which also extends to things like combat, since spending too much time in battle and prolonging combat actually hurts your characters. As such, if you love turn-based combat from JRPGs but want something which is a lot more involved, this will be one to get. I like variety in my roguelites, so a subgenre that you don't see every day is the roguelite beat-em-up Lost Castle 2, a straight-up side-scrolling belt action brawler that gives off vibes similar to games like Streets of Rage, but in a fantasy setting with some very pretty hand-drawn art. This is the sequel to a popular title from 2016 but looks so much better, where the developers took lessons learned from there to tweak and improve this game. You are using over 200 different weapons and armor to battle enemies, along with roguelite-style relics for game-changing power within a run, but if you do die, you're able to use collected resources in camp to unlock permanent upgrades as in modern roguelites. As is the norm for beat-em-ups, this does have co-op support so you can play with friends, with the developers actively working on their early access roadmap to add new levels, weapons, enemies, difficulty modes and much more, but as is, it is already a fantastic title. One of the hidden gems in the roguelite space this year is Cat God Ranch, a so-called symbol building roguelite title that has similarities to games like Luck Be a Landlord, but this time you're drafting animals instead, where the combos between animals rewards you with a currency so that you can pay tribute to the cat god. Animals are grouped into different families with various interactions between them, such as carnivores eating other animals for example, or animals which boost the production of the same animal when they are next to each other. It has an adorable art style as well, along with prop cards which can be thought of as relics for additional modifiers to your strategy. There are a number of cat gods to appease, 100 plus animals, and even a variety of difficulty levels, and is very satisfying when you see the numbers pop off. A sweet looking action roguelite title is Realm of Ink, one that's inspired by Chinese calligraphy but with colour of course, having a bit of a meta storytelling aspect as well, since the main character, Red, realizes that she is a character in a book and that her life is predetermined by destiny and now wants to fight to break free. Visually, this looks gorgeous and in many ways does resemble Hades, which is not a bad source of inspiration, while Heroine has 9 different forms which wield different weapons, which is where the variety comes in. The developers are actively updating the game with new content, but again, it's already a solid entry worth a play. Remember when I talked about variety? How about Emberward, a roguelite tower defense game which draws inspiration from Tetris, where you are drawing these Tetrimino-like blocks and placing them down on the map to create the maze which the enemy needs to move through. Of course, there will be a number of new towers, artifacts and runes to unlock as you play, having quite the variety as you adapt to the different level structures and construct your defenses strategically. Interestingly, towers have different sizes as well, so 1x1, 2x2, 1x3 and so on, with everything from poison, drones, lasers and more also having meta progression in terms of experience and permanent upgrades, making it one for tower defense fans. One of the best looking roguelite deck builders is DICEOMANCER, a game which is pretty much all art style due to the hand-drawn look, where the game is literally from a first-person perspective and is animated as such. For the most part, this is your regular Slay the Spire style deck builder in which you draft cards and play them, constrained by the energy cost in each turn, moving along a node-based map, getting into battles and resolving random events, and thus have 6 types of mana which can be combined to create 6 unique classes, drawing from over 500 types of cards and almost 200 relics. So far so good. However, the main mechanic in this game are the dice, which you can use to change any number in the user interface, including changing enemy HP values, boosting your own mana, or changing the price of items in the shop, being game-breaking in a way that makes you feel so clever and is awesome. Speaking of awesome, I wasn't liking the odds for the developer of Rabbit and Steel since this game released just a couple of days after the #1 game on this list, which is massive, but apparently this developer had a very strong community that helped spread the word. Also helped by the fact that this is one of the more unique entries of the year. You see, this is an action roguelite title with almost bullet hell inspired combat, in which you play as bunny girls taking on challenging bosses with MMO raid boss inspired designs. What that means is that you usually get a few seconds of warning where entire sectors of the level get covered by attack zones and you need to move out of the way to avoid getting hit. In MMO fashion, you have different classes and up to 4-player co-op, where players must work together to defeat the boss, gaining loot and upgrades along the way. Interestingly, this can be played solo and is surprisingly well balanced, so no matter how you play, this is a fantastic game. An idea that seems obvious in hindsight is Peglin, essentially roguelite pachinko, combining the ball-bouncing physics that made games like Peggle tremendously popular with the compelling replayability of a roguelite. This is framed as a turn-based RPG, which you see at the top of the screen, where enemies have HP and you can prioritize which to attack, with certain balls having attacks that fire off in straight lines, which means that you might hit multiple enemies. Of course, there are game-changing relics, but the core gameplay of aiming, firing and watching the ball bounce around, possibly activating special abilities like multi-ball, remains as fun as ever. While the pixel art isn't exactly the prettiest, it is functional and works for this game, with the variety of balls which you can level up being the main draw. A card-based roguelite dungeon crawler that I spent quite a bit of time with this year is Dice and Fold, one that is inspired by Solitaire in some ways and combines that with dice as you roll them and slot them into your heroes to activate abilities. The values on this dice matter, and the slots can take the form of either having to have a specific number, such as 3 2s, or can be a pool number, say 10, that decreases to 4 when you place a 6 die in it. There are more than 35 character classes to play and master, and you can gain additional party members along the way, having to think how they work together, along with special relics and items that will change your strategy. One cool thing about this game is that it is relatively easy at the start, giving you an easy win, but as you unlock more characters and difficulty levels, things do ramp up, so it's more than meets the eye and is a fantastic title.
What is a man?
They did it after more than 3 years and turning into a genre-defining legendary indie game. Vampire Survivors collaborated with Konami to bring you the Ode to Castlevania paid DLC, adding classic enemies and 20 plus new characters from that franchise into the game, along with 40 plus new weapons, alternative weapons for certain characters, one new monstrously large level, along with remixed versions of classic Castlevania tracks, where I'm sure that the developer was a fan of Castlevania, which led to him making this game in the first place, so it's a nice coming full circle kind of moment. Developer Pastech Games continues to crush it, since following the success of Curse of the Dead Gods, they went ahead to make another action roguelite in Ravenswatch, only this time with a dark fairy tale theme, where you play as heroes like Little Red Riding Hood, who now has lycanthropy, or the Snow Queen with her evil powers, being darker and more violent versions of characters that you have come to know and love, as they fight off nightmarish monsters. Their versions of beloved characters like the Three Little Pigs and Sinbad the Sailor are a treat to encounter, combined with great combat with plenty of talents and upgrades, makes this a must-play for fans of the genre. Another release out of early access of note is Nova Drift, one of the best kept secrets in the roguelite space, since it was chugging along in the background with update after update for many years, so much so that there's a massive amount of content in this game. This is a single-screen space shooter, so what you see is what you get, no scrolling levels and so on, where randomized waves of enemies spawn in and you need to take them out. What I love about this game is that it emphasizes build crafting and deep customization, having a wide variety of upgrades which you can mix and match in interesting ways. Examples include focusing on melee, wielding a pair of swords which can parry projectiles, or a Protoss carrier-like build that summons swarm constructs to do the dirty work for you. Or how about a Leviathan build where you can become a serpent and intentionally ram into enemies. On top of these are super mods, which are additional modifiers on top of that, for example, combining all your projectiles from different weapons into one giant projectile, along with challenge, draft, endless and wild metamorphosis modes, which gives you plenty of replayability. A sick-looking roguelite tactical strategy title is Shogun Showdown, one that has a Japanese theme and setting, but is essentially Sidon Into the Breach, which is one of my favorite games of all time. You play as a single character and must face off against multiple enemies, where their intentions are made known to you, and you can react accordingly, whether it be to target the enemy that will deal the most damage, or to swap positions with another enemy to cause them to attack each other. Deck building grants you various skills and options in combat, along with relics and unlocks from run to run, not to forget the gorgeous pixel art as well, which makes this a no-brainer pick. Bigger developers and IP have experimented with the roguelite structure as well, since again, endless replayability is appealing, in which BlazBlue Entropy Effect is a side-scrolling roguelite platformer that uses characters from the BlazBlue fighting game franchise. but was not made by Arc System Works, but rather developer 91 Act. If I were to use one word to describe this game, it would be flashy, since the animations and abilities are really over the top, filling the screen in an explosion of colour and light, having 10 playable characters, hundreds of moves, elemental effects and skills which can pass from one character to the next and might just be the biggest roguelite using an established IP. Alright, so a minor caveat here in that Mullet Mad Jack does have roguelite inspiration, but the main campaign mode is not a roguelite, but does have an endless mode where you can play the game forever if you want until you die, being an anime-inspired first-person shooter that forces the action. In the future, man and the internet have merged into a new being, so you need a dopamine hit every 10 seconds or you will die, so you need to kill these robots to extend your life. The reward at the end of each level is a choice between 3 upgrades, sound familiar, which you can take into the next level. The second-to-second combat feels awesome in an almost Hotline Miami kind of way, oozing all kinds of style as well, and is excellent. Of course, the next game from the developer of Dead Cells is of note, where they have switched from roguelite platformer to one with the 3/4 view camera angle in Windblown, having a very interesting world setup in which floating chunks of land orbit a giant and deadly vortex where our heroes come from a village on one of these islands. However, the peace is disrupted when the vortex begins to spew forth sentinels, monstrous enemies that will destroy your village, so the player characters, known as Leapers, go forth and fight off these enemies. It's a brutal world and Leapers get horrendously killed by these enemies, but luckily, that is baked into the design of the game, since you're able to access the memories of fallen warriors to unlock special powers and to augment your gear, being one of the main progression systems in between runs. The action is fast-paced and intense, especially with the almost Blink-like movement of the character, having just launched the Revenge update as of recording, which has made it even better. Folks, another one of these got me this year in Halls of Torment, a bullet heaven-style roguelite title, where indie game fans tend to get hooked on 1 or 2 of these per year, depending on which you try, whether it be Potato or Soulstone Survivors, or any one of the hundreds of these being made, where the throwback, almost Diablo 1 looking visuals and setting did work their magic on my craving for nostalgia. You play as a variety of heroes delving into the halls of torment, killing enemies and trying to stop the lords of the underworld, having a very compelling meta progression system with a variety of objectives, equipment which you can permanently unlock, combined with the sheer satisfaction of slaughtering hordes of enemies, makes this a personal recommendation. Of course, what more has to be said about Joker Poker Balatro, since this game took the world by storm, being the application for this meme, since people frowned on a card game being in the running for Game of the Year, but the moment they try it, it hooks them in, being one of the most ridiculously addictive games that will destroy your productivity. And I don't use addictive lightly, so if you have, I don't know, all your free time to spare, this game will gladly eat it all up. At the end of the day, I'm a big fan of Hades, so I was very pleasantly surprised to see Supergiant make the sequel, since they have not done that for their other games, and while it feels familiar, it is different enough, especially with the Omega attacks, to make this of note, where you play as Melinoi, sister of Zagreus, who has to kill the Titan of Time. The early access launch version had a comparable amount of content to the original game at 1.0 release, so it's a substantial amount, and while they're going for the slow burn route with this game, only releasing one major update so far 5 months after launch, it is the quantity and quality that you would expect from this team, and I'm expecting this title to blow the first game out of the water when it is done. Watch this video for the best upcoming action roguelites of 2025.
Come then, agent of change.